I have to drag this over here so I can see the chat also. All right, so I thought, so a little background on how like I started learning React. It can be pretty intimidating at first to learn a new framework, but I think especially for a junior level developer, you should really need to know, one, how to use Node, and two, how to use version control, so Git, and then three, how to use like the most popular like pre-built boilerplate system to get right into the framework and start coding. In this case, this will be a package developed by Facebook called Create React App. Facebook also developed React, so this will be very out of the box. Yeah, so this will be very out of the box. We just need to make sure that we have Node set up. If you're not sure if you have Node set up, a good way is just typing node -v in your terminal. Sorry, node -v in your terminal. And it should print out if you have Node. I like to also use Yarn, which is basically a Facebook's wrapper around NPM. So if you want to match exact commands with me, you can do npm install global yarn once you have Node set up. And from there, you should have access. If we look at, and I should have all of these links in chat at the top. And if anyone wants me to slow down, just drop something in chat. I can try to help you out with something. But this is the documentation for Create React App. They're really nice. We're going to be using TypeScript today, just because it's what I'm most used to doing. And I also think that TypeScript specifically can be very useful when developing a unit test in TDD, because it gives us really great linting and just making sure that we're type safe with everything. So the command to do this, do we need actually yarn due to TypeScript? No, we don't. You could also create npx, create React app, my app, template TypeScript. You could just run this with Node. Just if you would like to use yarn, you can also install it with Node here. So either of these commands, depending on if you have yarn installed or not. Yeah, for sure. I'm going to drop in yarn in the chat. Type in the documentation for Create React App with TypeScript in the chat. And I'm going to grab this command here, which should be able to spin up a app. I just have like a project folder that I work off of here. And you can change this to whatever you want it to be. CA to do. Once we push enter, Node is going to start pulling down all the packages that we need and creating a new boilerplate practice for us to start playing with React. This should take about a minute and a half. Do you guys have any questions while we wait for this? While it's loading, I think I should talk a little about, I guess, exactly what I mean by to-do list. So one, our general goal here is to create an input that will add items to a list. And we should be able to add items, edit them, and then delete them, and then also restore the list back to a default state are going to be our primary goals. And these will be the test cases that we write out and try to fix as we make our reducer function. React and TypeScript together, they're really, I mean, especially in Detroit, they're really they're a really great stack to get into the industry. There's a lot of junior level jobs available with React and TypeScript. There's also great documentation out there, great communities for learning. It has a very low overhead, I would say, especially with React hooks. Let's see, behind, okay, looks like you have no longer support global installation. All right, Vladimir, looks like you have a previous version of Create React app installed, which I think that we can start. Let's see, troubleshooting. If your project's created, not created, currently using Create or not, see this blog post. Okay, Vladimir, I think this might be what you might be running into here. You might need to uninstall your global Create React app package here, and then use npx to install. You probably were using npm before to create a React app, and now you can just use npx. Yeah, awesome. npx is actually really cool because you don't actually need the package. It just accesses the package for you and pulls it without you needing a global package on your system. Yeah, and so the last thing that's really nice about React is they recently rewrote it into something called React hooks. React used to be written strictly in class components, and there were a lot of life cycles that you could hook into that were very imperative. But also, I mean, from my experience, especially because I started really coding React super fresh right before hooks. It was very imperative, but also a high overhead really for me to understand what was going on. Hooks, in my opinion, are a lot simpler. They've really distilled all of these lifecycle events. They've really distilled most of them into use effect. And then we also have use state. Use state and use effect are the big ones. And we're also going to go over use reducer, which is pretty much, it's really a good way if you have like a lot of states floating around your React app to consolidate them all into one state. And just like let your reducer function handle all the business logic, and then your UI and your JSX rendering components can really focus on the actual UI. Well, it looks like it removed it, Vladimir. So hopefully, let me know if you can get your npx create React app running, okay? It works, awesome, that's great. So if anyone's following along, they're probably, looks like I am, yeah, this is what you wanna see right here. This means that Create React app, it's done its job, it's created, it's made its boilerplate for you, and it's ready to use. I'm gonna cd into that. And Lord willing, you should be able to type code period to open it in your text editor. If not, you can go right to your text editor and manually open this new folder. Awesome. So let me take you guys through the tour of the boilerplate while we're waiting for other people to load it up. In here, we have our node modules. So these are all the packages associated with the boilerplate. Don't need to worry about too much about this for now. We have our public folder, and this is going to hold our index HTML and also any assets that we might want. Like you see, it comes with a couple of preloaded logos here. A manifest folder, and then a crawler, robots text for cookies. And then if we see, this is also documented really well, so it's really nice to read through this. But the magic of React's really happening right here at this div ID root. So React is going to construct a virtual DOM and sort of plaster it into this ID root here. And we're not going to be writing like strict HTML. We're going to be writing JSX, which is sort of like a hybridized JavaScript HTML, which we can see an example of in SRC app actually right now. So you see here we have a function app. React's mostly, it's almost always written in functional components now. The exception of barriers for error handling is a big one. But usually with most React apps, you can write a function where you return. This looks awfully a lot like just straight HTML, but this is JSX. And then this app is going to know to render inside that div ID root. Really, all that magic is happening here. If we want to read through it kind of slowly, we can basically say that we're taking the React DOM library, we're rendering our app, which we've imported here, and we're attaching it to that document.get element.byId root. Any questions so far? Just like basic React structure. Awesome. All that. We'll close that out. All right. So the next thing really to look at here is our package log. Root as a home. So thinking about a home page in React is a little more complicated if you want to think about home pages just like with straight up HTML, CSS files, because we're using the virtual DOM. We're going to have to need libraries to associate more than just the root route with our application. And we use a package called React Router for that. Right now, we're just building a single page application, so we don't need to worry about that. But that is an overhead to working with React for sure. So if you want to make what looks at least like a multi-page application, you'll have to learn the React Router library. It's pretty simple, but it is a little bit of overhead. But we'll just be focusing on a single page application today, which we can actually see if we look in package.json. We have a list of scripts that we can use, and the only ones we'll really be using for the session are start and test. And if we say yarn start right now, as long as this should work for everybody except for me because I'm on Linux right now, but this should automatically load up your localhost server with an example of the app. And if it doesn't work, you can easily load it from the network IP, which will be supplied to you once the script runs here. So I already have it running on another port. I have a couple of projects floating around here. Sorry about that. I made sure React app was working right before I started here. Awesome. That's great news, Vlad. We'll see if mine works. All right, there we go. So most people should be able to see it localhost 3001. If that doesn't work, this should work for you also. Awesome. So here's just the basic out-of-the-box React app that comes with the Boilerplate. So let me get these side by side here. Awesome. Okay, so now that our app is started, we can make live updates wherever we want, and we can see the code immediately compiling. So if I just added exclamation mark here, save the file, recompile here, compiled successfully. And so we should be able to live edit and see everything up. That's awesome, Victoria. Glad you guys are up and running. That's great news. Is anybody having any problems? We might want to troubleshoot for a second. All right, so this, I mean, basically, you have the whole world in your hands now, right? Once you're at this point, this unlocks a lot of React tutorials for you. Now that you have it running in your IDE, you have it running locally on your server. So yeah, this opens up a world of possibilities for you. And honestly, like this is one of the hardest parts is to slog through this overhead here, right? Making sure that you have everything lined up. So yeah, I'm really happy. That's awesome. Okay, let's move into the to-do app, actually. And I'm going to build this starting with the scheme of the app. And this, so we can start learning a little about TypeScript first. Yeah, right. Let's make a new file. And let's start defining some types that we're going to use for our system. So I'll call this types.ts, okay? Okay, what's the first type? We really, at its core, on a to-do list, we're passing around a to-do item, right? So let's type that out. And let's export all of our types because we'll be using them in other files. Export type item. And this item is going to have an ID, which can be a number, and a description, which can be a string, right? We're also going to have state, and we're going to need to modify this state with our reducer function. And we need to type all that out. So let's do it. Export type state. And for now, at its basic, we'll just have it be an object of to-dos. And these to-dos can be an array of items. You type out like that. Okay? So what do we just do? The great thing about this is if I try to type out const bad item, and we can name it an item, right? And if this item has if this item has something like prop that says hi, TypeScript right here will tell us we can't assign hi as a string to type item. It doesn't exist in item. If we want to make item with an ID of 1 as a string, same thing. Type string is not assignable to type number, right? So this is a really, so TypeScript, once we have, I really like when I'm coding to make sure that my contracts are all like super safe. I have everything written out and planned in the beginning, so I don't have to worry about it anymore, right? Awesome. Let's pull up now the documentation around use reducer, which I'll drop right now in chat for hooks reference. So if we look at the sample here for a reducer function, we have a state and an action and this action has a type, and it will basically return state depending on what the type of that action is, okay? We're gonna take this like pretty basic example and we're gonna expand it a little to use TypeScript. So let's start with do that. Let's start by thinking about what the action is going, and if anyone has like worked with Redux or any other state machines like X machine, this might sound pretty familiar. We're basically creating dispatch objects. So we can do an add action And this will have the type of add as a string. We'll get to later once you write the reducer function, and hopefully it'll make more sense to you guys, but I'm just going to blow through this right now. But we'll have an add action with a type of add, and its data. Let's see, when we want to add an item, all we really need to know is the description in that input field that we're filling out, right? So this data will be a string. And then we'll have an edit action, which will be type edit. And the data here, if we think about what kind of data we need to edit an item, well, we're going to need the new description, right? And we're also going to need to find that item in the array. And really the best way, I mean, we could do that with array indexes, but really the best way is to search by the ID of the item. So if we need the ID in the description, really we just need an item, right? And we should be able to update state with all of this. We also have a delete action. And in order to delete an item per array, all we're really going to need is that ID data point, right? So our data here can just be number. Finally, we can have a type action, which can be a union of all of these individual actions. So an action can either be an add action, or an edit action, or a delete action. Awesome. So now we've typed out state and we've typed out action for our resolver. You should be able to hover under any of these, and TypeScript should be able to give you like useful tips about what you should be passing in whenever you want to do any of these actions. Everyone with me so far? Okay. Now that we have these types set up, what I'd like to do is start the reducer function and just write the most basic implementation. So basically, no matter, well, actually, we should have one more action that I forgot about, which is sort of like a reset action. Two reasons for this. One, we'll probably want to reset the form in state. But also, two, we want to be able to call our reducer function with an action that doesn't really do anything and just return initial state in order to initialize it and write our test cases out. So we'll have a reset action. This will be type reset. Since we know this will go to initial state, it doesn't need any data at all. Everyone with me so far? Awesome. All right, let's start writing our functions. Let's make a new file. Call it reducer.ts. And we are going to write our reducer function. It's going to look a lot like this, just a little more TypeScripty. So we are, first, let's import our types. Let's import state and action. Let's export a new function, reducer. And this is going to take in state and action, and it will return state. So what do we just write? And also, why is there's a good error here already, right? So this reducer function we just wrote, if we hover over it, it says that our parameters that we need to feed in need to be typed to state in one of those actions, and our function is going to return state. Right now, we got the squigglies because it's not returning anything, and it says it needs to return state. Awesome. Everyone with me so far? When we see what they do here is they like to switch off of action.type, and honestly, I like that too. So let's do it. We got the squigglies, yeah. But, you know, squigglies are great because it means it's going to tell you what you're doing wrong, right? So we'll switch off the type of the action. And right now, let's not even worry about anything. Let's just return the state that was fed in. This should satisfy the constraints of TypeScript. So if we look over type, TypeScript's telling us, yeah, this type should be add or edit or delete or reset. You can see if I do like case hi, it's going to tell us that's not, we didn't define that. It's not any type that we wrote in any of our actions. So really nice. So now that we have a reducer that is just going to return state, I think it's time that we should start writing our first tests and start moving into TDD, because right now we have the most basic implementation of our function possible pretty much, right? So let's do it. Let's maximize this. Let's make a new file in SRC. We'll call it reducer.test.ts. Awesome. And let's import our reducer function. Okay. Sorry. One more thing before we start the test is we need to define an initial state, at least. So let's do that. Let's export initial state, and this can just be, this can have an empty array. Let's make sure we type state to state so we get that nice TypeScript linting. I don't even remember what I called it anymore. Property to do's is missing. Awesome. We'll have an empty array there. All right, awesome. Let's import that into our reducer. So, talking a bit about testing, and with Jest comes out of the box in React testing library, and it's really easy to use. It looks exactly like any other testing library you might use. It's the wrapper for a lot of other testing libraries that you probably have used. But we're just going to use the basic implementation here, and we're really only going to be doing describe, it, and expect. Okay. So describe really describe should describe a collection of use cases around a function when we're talking about unit tests. In this case, we're just describing the reducer. Okay. We hover over describe, and again, this is really nice with TypeScript. We know that describe needs a name and a callback function, right? We can see it's expecting another argument here. We're following along with it. Let's give it an anonymous function to call back. These are going to house your individual test cases for your function. And I usually just write in line exactly what I would expect something to do. In this case, it returns initial state, or returns, let's do it, returns initial state. Just like describe, it takes a decorator and another anonymous function. And so since our reducer will take in state and an action return state, we can call this const next state. Conceivably, the next state the reducer would serve, if we served it our initial state, and let's give it that default dispatch type. Default is not, sorry, type reset. There is TypeScript saving me again. All right, and we're going to expect. So the last thing we're going to use is expect, where we're going to make our assertion. So we're going to expect next state. When you're comparing objects, especially objects with nested data, you want to make sure you check everything in the array. Like if I said expect next state to be initial state, it wouldn't check everything inside. Instead, we have to say strict equal initial state, right? All right. You guys wrote your first test. Using Visual Studio Code, you can do control and then the key next to the 1. And you can open up your terminal right in Visual Studio Code, which is really nice. And in your terminal, we're going to run this test. And if we look back in package.json, running yarn test should run our test suite. We're going to target our tests, and the way to do that is just by typing yarn test reducer. We're also going to decorate it with watch. This is going to rerun the test whenever we change anything. So yarn test reducer -- watch. See what happens. Control tilde, thanks, Julia. Apologize, my computer seems to be going a little slow here. All right. Who else has a passing test? One failed. What does it say, Victoria? It should tell you, which actually I can illustrate that really soon. Before I write something wrong where you define the initial state, take you back to my reducer so far. Squigglies under it. Oh, maybe you didn't import it into your test file. All right, I'm going to keep an eye on chat, and I'm going to start writing a couple more test cases, okay? At this point, oh, weird. Did the jest actually give you a printout of the failure? Because it should, for example, if I just, oh, I can break the test really quick. If I write our next test, yeah, you can add the error to the chat. We can check it out too. Missing semicolon in reducer. Yeah. The dreaded missing semicolon. Who knows where it is? It looks like line 32. Anyway, I'm going to start creating some mock data, which we can just create in a new file. Mainly because we want to reuse this data and we don't want to repeat ourselves, right? Yeah, I do not know why this is estimating 17 seconds. Something was wrong going on here. Anyway, let's pull up our types. Let's start writing out some expected states and some expected items. I wonder if we should do a dictionary. Not quite yet. Let's just start typing some things. So we can export a const sample item 1. It can be an item. And we'll have an ID of 1 and description test 1. Okay. Create a couple more. Two, 3. Yes, but this will just be a template so we can plug into our tests exactly. Let's have a sample. Well, we can just use initial state for our sample empty state, but let's have a sample state with 1 item. Do sample item 1. And we'll do 2 more so we can test adding these in. 2 items, 3 items. I'll just drop this right in chat since I'm typing kind of fast, and you guys can just copy paste. Actually, we should type these together. Okay, this will be a quick backbone of some test mock data that we can start working with our tests. Yeah, Vladimir, I will upload this to a GitHub afterwards for sure. And I do have a sample GitHub that should look very similar to this because it is what I did in a dry run with Julia yesterday. And I will put that in chat right now. That should be pretty close to what I'm writing out here. Okay. Victoria, did you ever find that semicolon error? Let us know. We can try to take a look into it. Meanwhile, in our reducer test, let's write our first failing test and then try to fix it, which is really the beauty of TDD. Really, you just want to make your function do the most simple thing, write a test for that, and then write one more complicated test that you know will fail. And then as you incrementally change your function to do more and more complicated things, you can catch a lot more use cases that way. Hopefully we can catch a couple while we're doing this because I know we're going to need to generate an ID somehow, right? So let's write our first test case that is going to fail. It returns state with 1 item after adding, right? Your next state is going to be reducer from initial state, and we are going to dispatch an action with type add, and its data is going to be test 1. That's our sample item 1 here, right? And we want to expect next state strict equal sample state with 1 item, right? So reading through this, gotta import this. Also, if you see something like that, if you hover over something, let me go a little slower there. I just wrote this without importing it. You can often hover over and push Control Enter, and it should give you a GUI to import it. Why don't use all test cases at once? What do you mean by that, bud? It's an interesting question. Well, something is wrong here because this passed, right? Oh, I never saved. Yes. Here to save your files. Save your files, yeah. So our first failure, you see here that our object is expected, this description test 1, ID 1, but we really just have an empty array here. I mean, that's expected because all we're doing is returning state. We haven't built our case for adding, right? There are definitely easier ways to do this, Vlad. One way is to use a dictionary and a constructor. I definitely just threw out some hard-coded values to get us going because I think that just visually they are pretty easy to understand. But yeah, there's definitely better, more programmatic ways to do this for sure, which is a great call out. Thank you. Anyway, let's add our first case. Case add, right? When we want one other big pillar of React is immutability. And what I mean by that is when we are taking state and we're returning state, we always want to return a copy of state. We never want to directly modify the values. Like we would never want to do like delete this to do item.description. We always want to return copies of it. It's just a super cardinal rule of React. I'm honestly struggling right now to give you guys like a technical reason why. Oh, the missing equals, yeah, almost as bad as the missing semicolon, Victoria, for sure. Anyway, what do I mean by that? If we're modifying state right now by adding an object on, we really want to return state as a spread object. Right now, this doesn't really matter because state only has one thing on it. But to say that we also wanted to have an error message that we want to show, right? We want to make sure that we return whatever error was already on that state. And so we want to make it immutable. So we want a spread here. And then for to-dos, we're similarly going to spread all the to-dos that we already have. And we're going to make a new to-do with an ID of, not sure what to do there. Let's say 1 for now. And its description, going back to types.ts. If we look back at our add action, the data coming back here is a string for the new description for our to-do item, right? So this description is going to be action.data. So this should satisfy our test. But I'm sure if we write another one, it will fail it because we obviously don't want to add an ID of 1 everywhere, right? So it's passing now, but what if we say it returns state with 2 items or this should say maybe just adds item to mature state. So if we were to reduce sample state with one item, and that at a test 2, and we'd expect next state to 3 items, or sorry, 2. Okay, you're right, Brad. This is confusing with all this. So waiting for this test to undoubtedly fail, it should become apparent after adding with one item, we should have 2 items. That's correct. And we should still have 2 items in our test, but it should show a critical failure. Yeah, look. So we've added another item with that of test 2, but we now have 2 items with the same ID, right? When we're adding next state sample with 1 item to 2 items. So we have 2, but we have 2 with an ID of 1, which is really bad. We need 1 with an ID of 1 and 1 with an ID of 2 when we look right here, our expected sample items. So yeah, what went wrong? What do we need to do? We really need another function here, I would say, that I would call like find next ID. And let's take in to-dos, item array, and let's output a number. Import item up here. So we have an array of items. What do we really need to do to find next ID? Well, if our array is empty, right? We can just return 1, right? And otherwise, we should really find the maximum ID of all of these to-dos and then enumerate it by 1. The way I can do that is we can map over our items and return IDs. So we can say mapped IDs equals to-dos dot the map function here. This is like probably my most used JavaScript function. You can map over anything, and then over every iteration, you can return whatever you want. So this will map across each to-do and return. Shouldn't be called to-do, sorry. Should be called to-do. Return to-do dot ID. So look at here, mapped IDs is a number array. Is to-dos an object? To-dos right now is an array of items, which are going to be, we're basically like looking at all of these to-do items in the list, trying to find the maximum ID and then add it by 1. So to find the maximum ID of this now number array, which we can look here, like TypeScript already knows this is a number array, right? It knows that we're taking an array of items, we're mapping across, and for every item, we're returning its ID, which is a number. So TypeScript already knows these mapped IDs is a number array. So to-dos is an attribute on our state object. It's not an object itself. We really want to just return, well, for find next ID, Vlad, we really just want to return, we really need to be able to find what next ID we should have to update here when we're returning our state with a new to-do. And we can see, I think that your question might be, when we reconstruct state with to-dos, we bring all the to-dos already there, and then we add this new to-do. Got it? Cool. So we can return the maximum value. Capital M math. I think we have to spread these. Yes. Plus 1. Wow. I wonder if that works. You know, it's a great way to check a unit test. So let's import find next ID from here. Oh, we can use it in a reducer too to fix the test we have. So when I mean find next ID here, we can just say find next ID from state.todos. Make sense? Yeah, we could totally, that is another great way to do it, Vlad. We could use a random ID and then just check that it isn't random at all. Yeah, that's another great way to do it for sure. Really, I'm using these iNumeral IDs 1, 2, 3 just so I can have simple mock data to show TD the best way, I would say, for sure. Oh, we see that we're now adding an item to mature state, which is great news. Since we already have these states in mock data, sample state with 1, 2, 3 items, we can use those to like spin up tests really easy to make sure that find next ID is working right. So we'll start that in a new describe block. Oh my God, you had 6:55 already. We're only going to get through add. Find next ID, it should return 1 with empty to-dos. Okay. Find next ID of initial state dot to-dos to equal 1. Right. Similar with the other two states we have defined. Again, this is a little overkill, Vladimir, for sure. But I mean, sometimes your test can be overkill too, because we're really just copying and pasting other data, and it should work exactly like this anyway. To do with an item to-do list. Two and 3 item. This can be sample state with 1 item to-dos, sample state with 2 items to-dos. Just writing everything out really imperative here. So initial state should return 1 for ID, 1 item should return 2, 2 should return 3. We're just making sure we can enumerate. How do you check that it's empty? I just checked that the length of the array triple equaled 0. If the length of your array list is 0, return 1. Cool. Look at all those tests. Julia, should I keep going, or how long should we keep this to, do you think?
Yeah, I mean, if you want to keep going, if anybody has to drop for any reason, we will be sending out a recording of this sometime next week. But if you're free to keep going, Josh, we can do that.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. All right. Well, let's keep it rolling, guys. If you have to drop, understand, but love if you guys could stay on and keep working with us.
Yeah, because I'd love to at least get through the edit and the delete functionality, and then maybe just like throw up a UI into our app file so we can see it.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. Vladimir, how do you check this empty? Well, yeah, each time that the array is empty, we'd want to start with the ID at 1, just with like the system we set up, for sure. Yeah. Let's try to write an edit, a failing edit test next, okay? In this case, we would, it's an item. Next state. We just start with our sample state with 1 item. We'll attempt to dispatch a type of edit with data should try to grab that ID and update the description. And we could write this out, next state out in mock data, but to go a little faster, I'll just write it right out. Expect next state strict equal do's one to do with an ID of 1 and a description of updated, right? So what this test is saying is we want to take the state, sample state with 1 item. Oops. Close the file accidentally. Yeah, it wants to have the sample state of 1 item, which is sample item 1, ID 1, test 1, and it wants it to find an ID of 1 with a description of updated. Awesome. We can see here that it wanted updated. It still got test 1 because edit actually doesn't do anything. Now we can just add that edit case right in. Case edit. Return spread state again. And this time, we're going to map across state.todos. The reason why I'm mapping across state to-dos here is now we can evaluate if that to-do list item's ID matches the ID of our dispatch data coming back in. And if it does, update it. And if it doesn't, just return that. a big thing that this does is it will make sure that our list, like we're not moving things around in our list, right? Like we don't want to find that item, update it, and then spread it at the bottom of the list, because then when we update something, if it's in the middle of the list, it's going to go down to the end. Thanks so much, Victoria. So what I would do for there is I'll just evaluate if this to-do's ID equals action data ID. And if not, we'll just return the to-do. And so if this is the case, we'll return a to-do, but with its description being action.data.description. So I'll walk over that one more time while we're making the list. When we want to edit, we have our action data coming back in. You can see for edit action, we have an entire add item. So we have an object with an ID and a description coming from our dispatch. We're going to map across our to-dos, and for each to-do, if its ID equals the ID that we're trying to update, we're going to return that to-do, but with an updated description. Otherwise, we'll just return the to-do. And look, we have it editing an item now. All right. Home stretch. Let's write a test for delete, and then let's write some very basic UI so we can actually see something happen. All right. And this should be pretty easy to write too. Next state here will be producer with 2 items. And we'll dispatch type delete, and we'll try to delete the second one. Add 2, right? And we'll expect next state equal state with 1 item. While we wait for this to fail, which it should, we can write our delete action here. Oh, that's not good. Sample state with 2 items should be sample. Yeah, because it can't be deleting it. I haven't written that yet. There we go. Okay. So we're looking at just, it wanted to see this array. It still has that item in there. It's still failing. Great. So let's fix that up real quick and write a delete case. State and to-dos. Really, we can just use a filter function here on our to-do list and filter out anything by that ID coming back in action data will be the simplest way to do this. So filter looks a lot like map. To-dos, you filter from to-do. And if, we can return all, really you want, for filter, you want to construct a Boolean and not the object. We can see here yeah, this return statement is going to be a Boolean. So we'll return that to-dos. We'll return if the to-dos ID is not equal to action.data. So what this is doing, each to-do, it's going to evaluate if its to-do's ID is equal to it. Sorry if this looks a little backwards from here, but we should be filtering out the to-dos by only returning if that ID does not equal action data. And once that passes, I would really like conceivably be comfortable with my business layer and be ready to write out the app, which I can show you guys just so like we can feel like we've done something at the end of this. And you know what? I already wrote, I'm just going to pull out the UI from my GitHub because we are running a little over. Let me copy this and assume I wrote everything the same, right? Okay. Let me take you guys through this little UI here. Well, first let's see if it works, because I truly wonder if it does. All right. Does it work? Cool. All right. Let me walk you through, guys, through this UI that I wrote. And hopefully we could see that a lot of the work that we did was for something. So if we look back finally at use reducer in our documentation, the way that we consume this reducer is we use the use reducer from React hooks. We bring in our reducer and initial state that we had. And then state is the state that we're rendering under the component. And dispatch will send dispatch to events to a reducer and change state. So you see here, I've just set up a simple form with an input. I've set up a ghost value so we can fill out the input with state here. I have an input whose value is on that, on change to send the input. And then when we submit this form, we'll prevent default to stop the event propagation from bubbling up and ensure that the form submits. And then just like we did in our test, we'll dispatch type add with that input we did, and then clear out the input. To edit the to-do, I'm just going to prompt a description. If you don't want to build a modal, you can just type prompt, and this will prompt a user, and you can save it as a variable and do whatever you want with it. It's really nice for scaffolding out quick things like this. Cannot find the app. Here it is.
Cool background.
And then, yeah, you see we map across to-dos here, and we show its description. And when you click the button, you have a delete button and an edit button. So sorry if I sort of sped up at the very end there and just plot the UI on with you guys, but I can drop the UI into chat, and anyone following along should be able to see a to-do list. way too big to put in there, but I should have the UI. I will drop my GitHub in the chat right now. And if there's no other questions, I think that is it from me, guys. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you everybody for coming today. I just wanted to show you guys, I just have one other little slide here with some informational things. I dropped some more links in the chat, including links to the Codecademy Discord server where you can keep up with our group as well as meet other groups within Codecademy. You can also join our chapter, which is how you can get emails from me that will notify you about future events like this. You'll also get a recap of this event with all of the links for everything we did today. So you can continue to work on this if you're not quite done yet. And then I did want to tell you guys our next event is April 3rd. It will be led by me and it will be a SQL event. So it will be very beginner friendly and we'll be using some beginner basic SQL to explore a real publicly available data set. It's a data set about Texas death row inmates. So if you like true crime and data, you might enjoy this event, or you might think it's kind of spooky. If you like spooky things, maybe it's for you. So I hope to see you guys there. Thank you so much again for coming today. Really appreciate it, you guys. And hopefully we'll see you next time. And thank you, Josh, for doing this today.
Yeah, no problem, guys. Yeah, hope to do another one soon.
Oh, yeah.
Appreciate it.
We'll get it on the calendar. Thanks, guys. Bye.
Thanks so much, guys.